Alright, it's all good. So I guess hi everybody. I am Justin Kuiper. I'm here representing Route 59, and I'd like to give you a little bit of background on why it is that we're here and presenting to you today. So last November, 20 different companies applied to the New Enterprise Investment Fund for Entrepreneurial Businesses at RMIT. And to give you an idea for the kind of companies that these were, some of them were solar companies, pet food companies, companies doing things related to tourism, environmental products, and among them was us, Route 59, at the time a half-year-old visual novel studio, and we ended up being one of the 6 finalists selected to receive funding. So it's been, despite the age of our company only being 6 months, it's been a 2-year journey, and it is something that has been quite a lot of work. So to give you an idea of the kind of effort that went into this, it was over 300 man-hours. We're a 4-person team, and a significant portion of that time was spent creating prototype demos for what we were doing, assembling documentation for what we were doing. And what I'd like to emphasize is that this is something that you're going to have to commit serious effort to. It is not free money, and realize that because it has a time cost, you should not fundraise in certain situations, where building a product and getting something to the customers that you have is critical. One thing that you have to think about is, what are you going to do with the money? How is it going to allow you to better achieve your goals? Because if you can't answer that question clearly, that's one of the things that's going to come up in fundraising, and not having an answer to that question means that not only is it a bad idea to try fundraising, but it also means that you probably won't be successful if you do try to fundraise. So one of the things that we're going to talk about here is getting in the business mindset. One thing that I'd like to emphasize here is a lot of business concepts are fairly intuitive, but they sometimes use language that can be unfamiliar or confusing to you. So for example, think about something like ROI. The people who know what ROI is think, oh, this is this incredibly simple concept. It's just, you know, revenue versus investment. Whereas if you've never heard of ROI, you might be scratching your head. The thing is, the transition from being the person who scratches their head when hearing this acronym and having a full understanding of what it is probably just, 5 minutes or less of reading a wiki page. So just take the time to educate yourself. Realize that a lot of it is going to be updating your vocabulary and picking up concepts that should be fairly intuitive, and not having to do everything, think about what an MBA entails. That's not what we're doing here. We're learning as much as is necessary to get involved with this process. So realize that you are going to be asking for other people's money, and because you are asking for other people's money, you are going to have to be able to answer the question why they should give it to you. So you do this by making them an offer that is objectively good, and you have to address what they want. So in cases where you're pursuing money from investors, the giving them what they want is very simple. You have to be able to say, look, if you give me this amount of money, I'll give you a larger sum of money in return. You'll see a positive return on your investment. This can vary from body to body. So for example, one of the funding boards that we applied to was Film Victoria, which is an arts board, and one of the things that they wanted was to fund projects that would help the Victorian games industry. They want to support local development, supporting the arts. And so at the time, the appeal that we made to them was not, if you fund us, we'll give you a sweet return on investment and you'll make money off of this. It was, we will help you further your goal of advancing this local game industry. And at the time, we were a student team, and we said, here's what we have to offer. And like I said, investors are usually just concerned with the money. So one of the things that can really help in this process is to be able to have some record that you can look back on and show to investors or funding bodies. This is also sometimes called traction. And one of the things I'd like to emphasize is that a lot of people actually have more of a track record, more of a history, and more experience than they often give themselves credit for. For example, our team lead and our lead coder, Kevin Chen, he does not prior to starting the project, he had no experience with visual novel development, but he did have experience with game dev. And because he had experience developing games, he was experienced with Unity, the engine that we're using, and he was actually very qualified to be working on the project despite having no prior visual novel experience. Another story that I like to tell to sort of give you an idea of how skills that you might have that you might not necessarily think of is when I first entered the games industry, would introduce myself saying I am a writer with professional writing experience. And that came in the form of working for a period of about 1.5 years for a local paper. Again, emphasis on local. It had, thousands of readers, right? Very small audience. But because I had that experience submitting articles and so on and so forth, I could point to that and say, hey, that's professional experience. Nowadays, that might be the kind of thing that I wouldn't even think to mention on a resume. But the thing to emphasize here is you probably have a lot of things in your history that you can turn to for experience. Suppose you, for example, are a project manager at a volunteer organization. That can translate to being a project manager at a commercial company. So think about these things. I guess to address the other things that can serve as experience and history and things that give you credibility, awards are always great. In our case, we actually applied to a local game festival called Free Play in 2015. We ended up walking away with the trophy for Best Narrative. We got some nice photographs of that, and that's always something cool to show. It's not a huge games festival. As I said, it's local. It's not like we won IGF or anything like that, but being able to say, hey, we have this recognition is definitely better than nothing. Like I said, previous experience. And also, if you have any mentions in the press, those are clutch, because other people saying good and positive things about you is always better than you saying positive and glowing things about yourself. And the same applies also to social media. Social media sort of being a more distributed form of what you would call press contact. And also, in our case, a lot of showing our history was showing the prototypes that we had built, saying, here's what we've made so far, and we're going to make a commercial product that's based on this. So if you want to get funded, you are going to have to get out there and hit the pavement, maybe not so literally. One of the things I want to emphasize is this is not one of these things where you want to use a scattergun approach. So the wrong way to do this is to find a list of 500 people on LinkedIn that have investments in somewhere in their profile and sending them all an email blast. That is not how you do this. If you want to fundraise effectively, you're going to have to do it by engaging personally. Emphasis on personally, right? Because one of the elements of an effective presentation is that you custom tailor it, you personalize it to what the audience wants. So as I mentioned earlier, we applied for funding from 2 different bodies. One was basically saying, here's what we're going to do and it's going to be a good business. And the other was an arts board saying, we're going to do something that is going to improve the local industry and support local development. And we were able to speak specifically to all of their concerns because we had engaged with them personally. Also on this subject, part of this is going to be networking. It really shouldn't be a scary concept, even though some people seem intimidated by it. All that means is forming relationships with people, forming relationships with funding bodies, forming relationships with, in some cases, the press. This is, again, the kind of thing that shouldn't be that hard, largely because if you think about the kind of people that you would be applying for funding for example, if you're applying to an arts board, the people who are on that arts board are probably going to have an interest in things that are visually creative, right? If you're talking to a games journalist, they're probably going to be interested in cool indie games. You're interested in cool indie games, or in our case, visual novels. And because you have that coincident interest, you can just have a pleasant conversation with that person, sometimes in the context of a person-to-person meetup. It is something that should be fun because one of the things that you can't fake is sincerity. And if you come across as cynical and disingenuous in doing this specifically because you're trying to get something from them, again, that's going to work against you. So it should be something that you genuinely enjoy and is genuinely fun. And I think that once you get out there, you'll discover that it is actually more enjoyable than you might expect it to be. And lastly, make sure to have continual correspondence with these people, these individuals, these bodies, right? Because if you have no follow-up contact, that's how you follow through, right? If you talk to somebody at an event and you have an interesting conversation with them for 10 minutes, understand that they probably had an interesting 10-minute conversation with a bunch of other people that day. You're probably not going to stick out much in their mind, but what you can do to stick out in their mind is by sending them an email saying, hey, so-and-so, I really enjoyed our conversation today about such and such, and look forward to meeting with you in the future, or you could try to schedule a follow-up meeting. Lots of different possibilities here, and ultimately it's about keeping that relationship alive. So when you're presenting, what is your pitch? You have to answer the question of what it is that you are making. And on a fundamental level, you have to explain why it is that what you're doing is worth the money. You have to explain what the value proposition is. This is where you make the appeal to logic. You say, you give me this, and this is what I'm going to create for you in return. And sometimes that's going to be a project that has, local impact, is going to be beneficial for the local arts board because it's a prestige thing. Sometimes it's just a money thing where you're saying, like, look, this is how we intend to sell it, and this is how much you're going to get from that. But you have to figure out what the value proposition is and make that explicitly clear. So when you're getting to presenting, how do you tell them? Well, you show and don't tell. I realize that that's sort of a cliche. It's something that almost seems a little bit trite, being a cliche, but I'd like to break down what it is that means. Describing yourself using superlatives, saying we have made a great product, we are very passionate, those are meaningless statements when you're saying them about yourself. What you want to do is tell them information that will make them say, wow, these people seem very passionate about the project that you're working on. So if you can tell them, look, I'm a creator who has been working in this industry for 4 years. I've released 8 non-commercial projects during that time as part of game jams. That is going to speak to your passion and involvement in the community, right? Don't call yourself the adjective. Give them the information that lets them describe you as passionate or great or exceptional. Another thing to emphasize here, better to be narrow than vague. So you want to be very specific in your appeal. And some people shy away from this because they think that if they're specific, it will cause them to narrow their appeal. So an example of this would be, suppose you're making an otome game and you have an understanding that this is something that's largely going to appeal to women who are 14 years of age to 25 years of age, or whatever the case may be. Now, some people might look at that and say, ooh, that seems like a really narrow audience. Maybe I should make the case that, well, it is an otome game, but it has some crossover appeal, and really this is a game that could appeal to anybody. And at the point that you're saying, look, this is a project that will appeal to everyone, again, you've wandered into the territory of meaningless statement. The more specific you are, the more meaning you have, and it's also one of those things where once you have said this is something that is specifically targeting, an audience that is in the 14 to 25-year-old female demographic, then you can then say, and these are the other demos that we also think might be represented here. But again, if you have the choice between being narrow and vague, better to choose the former. And lastly, show them the plan, right? Articulate to them how it is that you're going to take the money that they give you and use it to achieve their goals. You should be able to explain this not only for their benefit, but also for your own benefit, right? It's not just a nebulous black box where give me money, outcomes, results. There is a process. You should understand what that process is, and then you should articulate that process to them. And thinking about what to tell them, one of the things that I think needs to be said here is that our industry has a lot of jargon. So what I mean by that is, just think about the term visual novel, right? We all know what visual novels are. We're here to, VN Kant, right? A lot of the funding bodies that you might be applying to don't even know what a visual novel is. So you have to think about a way to explain what that is. And in our case, we explain the concept of visual novels by describing them as Japanese-style narrative video games. And we demonstrated a familiarity with the industry involved with that by talking about, Western development versus Japanese development, and talking about the success of translated Japanese products versus, native Western products. But again, make sure that you're breaking all of it down for your audience, not only so that they can understand it, but also so that they have an understanding that, look, you have thought this through, you understand the territory that you're in, you're savvy, you're competent, and you're going to be a good steward of their money. And lastly, you are the product. And I just wanted to end on this thought because when you think about all of these things that we're doing, going out, meeting various funding bodies, forming relationships, networking, having relationships with potentially game journalists, and so on and so forth, a lot of those are relationships that hopefully are going to outlast the project. So if you think about the lifespan of a project, it's probably something that even for a long project, you're only going to be working on for maybe 2 or 3 years. Whereas your relationship with these bodies can last a lot longer than that. And that is, again, part of networking and also just part of this process, right? Your current project might not be what they're looking for, but who knows? Maybe in the future you'll have something that they want to fund. And on a fundamental level, right, we received funding from the New Enterprise Investment Fund. They're using the money to fund a project, but fundamentally, this is what they're funding, the team of 4 individuals, 3 Australians plus an American boy, that's me, who was able to peek his head in with the power of Photoshop. So with all of that being said, we kind of wanted to show off what it is that we did with the money. And we are going to be able to show you probably best, we have a trailer that we want to show on our website. And actually I have a teammate who's hanging out in the Discord chat, and I'll let him post the link to our YouTube video and our website. And oh yeah, by the way, before I sign off, one thing I just wanted to say is last year at GDC in San Francisco, we hosted a VN meetup. Quite a few people showed up. It was a wonderful experience, and we're planning to do it again this year. So if anybody in the audience is planning to show up to GDC in February, or is actually March, it sort of crosses the months, but yeah, if you're going to be there, get in touch with us, and we'd love to meet up with you guys. And also, you know, check out our websites and see what it is that we made. So I guess, yeah, that's the presentation. And if we want to get into a bit of Q&A,
Cool.
if anybody has questions that they want to pass along.
I think we have exactly 5 minutes. Perfect.
All right.
So I'm monitoring chat and the Q&A feature in case someone throws in a thing. Someone just asked, is visual novel really a video game, not a separate type of media?
That's a very good question. I guess one way to look at it is we show up at GDC, we sell our products on Steam. You could say that we are our own separate medium, right? Just being in the same listing on Steam with something like Mass Effect doesn't necessarily mean that we're a video game. At a certain point, I think the distinction becomes largely semantic. And when you talk to funding organizations, you know, you can get into sort of philosophical arguments about we are a new medium, but you have to make them understand what it is. And my experience, the best way to make people understand what visual novels are by comparing them to things that they're already familiar with. So common touchstones can be, you know, narrative video games like Telltale's The Walking Dead, or, you know, in some cases like those choose your own adventure books, which, you know, aren't games, but people probably understand what those are. So.
You know, someone asking, when talking to investors, do they ask about your management structure?
So one of the things that came up as a part of our funding process for our MIT is that they wanted us to submit a proposal that very clearly articulated who is working for us, all of our team members, and including, I believe, also reporting on several of the contractors that we were working on, just so we could explain how it was that we were spending the money. And yeah, as part of that, we did include this is who actually has an ownership stake in what we're doing, and here's who's a contractor, and here's. I'm not sure entirely I understand the question in terms of like articulating the management structure, but we did say, you know, here's our team lead, and here are all of the people who are generating assets. I hope that answers the question.
Yep, that's about right. Plus, like, you have to remember, a lot of these teams are small, right? How much structure can you have with 5 guys?
Right.
All right. So I think that does it for questions.